Hi, my name's Arnie Franklin. My friends call me Rooster, and I served 30 years in the Air Force as a fighter pilot. Ever since I was just a youngster, all I ever wanted to be was a fighter pilot. So I'm one of those people that grew up to be and do exactly what he had always wanted to do. I graduated from Western Kentucky University here in Bowling Green, and then I immediately went to officers training school. I graduated from that and went to pilot training. And my first assignment was as a fighter pilot to Nellis Air Force Base, Las Vegas, Nevada, flying F-111As. So here I was, young, 24-year-old, thought that I had God's gift to being the fighter pilot. And I did that for about 3 years, and then I was assigned to Southeast Asia as a forward air controller, flying OV-10s. I was a French-speaking fact when we weren't in Cambodia, but I did that for a while. And then they lost so many guys up at NKP, Nakhom, Phanom, that they asked for people to move up there. And so I spent the rest of my tour as a FAC over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, northern Laos, that area. Came back to Nellis, got recurrent in 111, and 2 weeks later turned around and deployed back to Southeast Asia for my second tour, flying F-111s, this time dropping bombs instead of just shooting rockets at people. Finished that, went back to Nellis, and got a call from the Personnel Center wanting to know if I wanted to go to AFIT, Air Force Institute of Technology, to get a master's degree in laser physics. And so I said, sure. And so soon after, I found myself at Wright-Patterson going through graduate school. And from there, I had a directed duty assignment for 4 years using what I had learned in graduate school as a laser physicist. And I did that for 4 years. And then in 1980, my family and I went to RAF Lakenheath, England. By this time, I was a major. And for a 3-year accompanied tour flying F-111Fs. And so I arrived at Lakenheath in the 495th Squadron, which was a fighter squadron, but it also served as an RTU, a replacement training unit. So I went through the short course for getting recurrent in 111s, and at the end of the course, all courses that you go to, they hand out a critique sheet, and so you critique the course with whatever you think is wrong. Usually guys take about 3 minutes and turn them in. But me and 3 other guys who had gone through this shorter course, all experienced F-111 guys, there were things about the course that we found was wrong, shouldn't be doing it that way. And so we sent in a 3-page typed critique sheet. Each one of us signed it. Graduated from there, went down to the 494th, my assigned squadron. And I wasn't there very long till I flew an F-111, me and another guy, down to Incirlik in Turkey. We would rotate down there for what was called WTDs, weapons training deployments, and because the weather was much better there than it was back in the UK. And about the second night that I was there, it was a Friday night, and they had a toga party at the officers club where guys take their sheets and dress up as a toga and put the thing around their head and go down and have a good time. And a bunch of people, 30, 40 people, some of them were women. There was 4 or 5 women there who were Dodds teachers at the high school there. And before long, there were 4 guys got up there on the stage, and they were playing to air guitar. They had their sheets on, and they were doing this, and when they finished, they turned around and raised up their sheets. A couple of them didn't have on any underwear. And so I'm sitting there with the assistant DO of the squadron and the DO, a guy by the name I'll just use, GBT. I'd never met him before, didn't know who he was, introduced myself. And we were all tanked up pretty good. I mean, it's late at night. And the bar had thinned out, but there was still a good number there. And GBT, sitting there looking at the stage, he said, who was that on the stage? They mooned, and there's women present. And the assistant DO, a good friend of mine, he said, oh, GBT, he said, I don't know who it was on the stage. Besides that, those women are all drunk like everybody else, and it doesn't make any difference. He said, no, I want to know who it was. And he looked at me, who was it? And I said, sir, I don't know who it was. I don't know anybody in the squadron. I didn't notice. Asked the assistant DO. He said, I didn't see it. I don't know who it was. He said, you saw it. Who was it? Don't patronize me. And I'm thinking, shit. I said, sir, I don't know who it was. Then he said, I don't know who it was. And he got up and he said, you two be at my office in the morning at 8 o'clock in your flight suits. He left, and I'm thinking, oh, shit, here I am. Don't even know him. I've been here. I'm in trouble. And he said, he's drunk. He said, don't worry about it. He'll forget about it. Just don't worry about it. So he roomed with GBT. And so I went back to my room, and I'm asleep, and a knock at my door the next morning, and it's Denny Brown in his flight suit. He said, he didn't forget. He said, get dressed. We got to be there in 5 minutes. So I got up, brushed my teeth, put on my flight suit, and went down there. I was standing there in front of his desk. Who was it? I said, sir, I don't know who it was. Then he said, I don't know who it was. He said, you're both fired. And I thought, fired from what? But anyway, he said, you're both fired. I want you on the Clong at 10 o'clock. They had a 141 that came down and brought more people, replacement people, parts and all that stuff. It was called the Clong. Came in every morning at 10 o'clock, C-141. So I went home, packed up my bags, 10 o'clock. I'm on the Clong, back to Lakenheath. And when I get there, I go back to the squadron. Squadron commander's there. And he said, what are you guys doing back? So Denny tells him the story, and he said, I forget about it. So I flew a couple of sorties, and then I got a call and said, the wing DO wants to see you. Wing director of operations. The guy's name was Sponebarger. He was in an F-111 that got shot down over in North Vietnam and was a POW for a short time. It was during the Christmas bombing. So I knew Sponebarger from the days back at Nellis when we were young. So I went in, reported in, and I'm standing there. He said, at ease. And he's sitting there at his desk, and he's reading something. And so I'm looking down at it, and it's the 3-page critique sheet that we had written when we finished. And he thumbed into it, and he read it, and he looked up, and he said, is this true? I said, sir, I signed it. Yes, sir. And he thought for a few minutes, and he hands me the piece of paper. And he says, you're now the new chief of the RTU. Go fix it. I said, yes, sir. Saluted, showed up at the 495th. So that's how I ended up serving a couple of years as the RTU chief in the 495th. And then I was the DO of the 490, the ops officer of the 495th. And then I was selected to be the commander of the 493rd Tactical Fighter Squadron. Went there in 80, now it's 86. Had to extend another 2 years so I could spend 2 years as a squadron commander. And so I went down to the 493rd and was commander of the 493rd. It was a good tour, successful. And then I find myself in actually it was 85, New Year's Eve, December the 31st of 1985. I was on Victor Alert. I had to deal with the young guys in my squadron. I said, if you guys will sit alert Christmas so the guys with kids can spend Christmas with their family, while then us old guys will spend alert on New Year's Eve so you can go out and do what young guys do on New Year's Eve. So that was the deal. And so as a squadron commander, you don't ask your guys to do anything you wouldn't do. So I found myself on Victor Alert. And so there I sat on Victor Alert, airplanes loaded with nuke weapons. Had to stay close to the airplane so we could launch on a moment's notice. We could expand away with little beepers, and we had special vehicles, but we had to always get back really quick so we can get the airplanes ready to launch, engines running and all that in case it's an actual execute order. So it was at the club. All the guys on alert, we'd gone to the club for New Year's Eve party. And at midnight, while all sang Old Lang Syne, kissed the wife, I said, okay guys, let's go. So we all went back to Victor Alert facility. I went to bed. My phone rang in my room, 2 o'clock in the morning. I picked it up, and it was the wing commander, Sam Westbrook. And he said, Arnie, I need you to come off of alert. I need you to go home, pack a bag, and be at base operations at 5 o'clock. you're going TDY to Ramstein. Ramstein was the air base in Germany where USAFE headquarters, U.S. Air Forces in Europe, headquarters was. And I said, what for? And he said, you'll find out when you get there. I said, yes, sir. I hung up the phone, and I'm thinking, where in the hell am I going to find an air crew that's not drunk, or at least is drunk in the last 12 hours to come on Victor Alert? Because you can't do that, you know, if you got alcohol in your blood. So I thought, well, that ain't my job. So I called my ops officer, and I said, Dan, I said, I got to come off of alert. I need you to send a replacement for me very quickly. And he said, what's the matter? He thought maybe I was sick or something. And I said, Colonel Westbrook called me, and I've got to go to Ramstein. What for? I said, I don't know, but I need somebody here quick. And he said, I'll be there in just about 10 minutes. And sure enough, Dan shows up, and then we have to sign all the paperwork for the bombs. You know, when you've got nuke weapons that you're doing, well, there's lots of paperwork involved. So we did all that, and I went home, woke my wife up, and I said, help me pack a bag. I got to go to Ramstein. She said, what for? I said, I don't know. How long are you going to be gone? I said, 3 or 4 days. So she helped me pack a bag. I threw in some flight suits, clean underwear, DOP kit, you know, that kind of stuff. But I flew in a pair of blues, dark blue pants and a light blue shirt, just in case. I had no idea. So got it all packed, drove up to base operations, and there sat 3 other guys. Same boat as me. Were called and told to be at base ops, going to go to Ramstein 5 o'clock. And they didn't have a clue what we were going to do, why we were going, nothing. 5 o'clock, out of the mist and the fog lands a C-130. Pulls up there in front of base ops, back ramp goes down, and out comes the crew chief. And we walk out to the ramp, and he looked around and he said, is this it? I said, guess so. So we got on this big C-130, and he took off and took us to Ramstein. And we landed, and a crew van met us and took us up to headquarters, a big building there, USAFE headquarters. We went into this room, pretty good sized room, had a lot of flat tables around like a flight planning room, and there was one table that had maps on it. We stood there for a few minutes, and in comes the 2-star, General Forgan. He's the DO, Chief of Ops for all of USAFE. And he comes in, introduces himself, and said, come over here. And looking at these maps, and it's a map of Gaddafi's camp and all that stuff. And he says, your mission is to plan an attack against these 3 targets. You got any questions? And one of the guys that went with us was a FWIC, Fighter Weapons School instructor. He was he had a master's degree, if you will, in F-111 tactics and weapons. It's named Muddy Waters. He was a captain. And Muddy said, yes, sir, I have a question. He said, what's the objective? And the general went, what's the objective? And Muddy said, what I mean by that, sir, is before I can recommend what weapons and tactics that we use, why I need to know what you want. What's the objective? Do you want us to just crater the runways? Because one of the targets was near airfield. You want us to just blow up buildings, or you just want us to kill people? And he said, the objective is we want maximum visible damage, we want minimum collateral damage, and we want to minimize the risk to Air Force crews. Got any other questions? And I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, what's that? And I said, do we have approval to fly across France? Because that made a big difference as far as getting there and back. He said, assume that you do. And he said, oh, by the way, he said, you need to plan, you need to produce a briefing after you've figured out your plan, and you need to brief the SHAPE commander, Army 4-star General Rogers. This is the same position that Ike Eisenhower had during World War II. And so he was the commander of all the forces, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all forces in Europe. A big job. And you're going to do that on the 4th of January. Now, this is the morning of the 1st of January. So he said, thank you very much. So he left. So we started planning, figuring out how we were going to do this. And our plan was that we were going to launch 6 airplanes. 4 of them were primary attackers, but 2 spares. We would take off, fly across France, meet a tanker down in the Med, take fuel, get our airplanes full of fuel, go strike one of these 3 targets, whichever one they told us to strike. With the ordnance, we were going to either carry 500-pound laser-guided bombs or 12 500-pound dumb bombs, depending on whether it was an area target or it was a point target. They wanted us to hit a building or whatever. So we were going to take those airplanes, and we were going to leave the tanker with 6 airplanes, and when we got down to the beach, I would find out the good 4 airplanes, and then the other 2 airplanes would turn around and go back to the tanker and wait for the attackers to get back. Going to do it at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so that was the briefing that we built. And so while we were building a briefing, while the DO, Colonel Tom Yax, Colonel, I said, boss, because he was our boss, I said, boss, who's doing the briefing? He said, you're the mission commander. If we fly this, you're doing the briefing. I said, yes, sir. So we built the briefing. Well, when you're going to brief Bernie Rogers, Chief of USAFE, General 4-star General Chuck Donnelly, he wants to hear the briefing first. So on the 3rd, there we were in the room briefing General Donnelly and his staff, and gave the briefing. And I said, sir, be happy to entertain any questions that you might have. So he turned to his staff, and there were a couple of questions, and then he said, can you fly this mission with 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs? I said, yes, sir. The airplane doesn't, it's a big airplane, it doesn't make any difference whether they're 500-pound bombs or 2,000-pound. We can fly it. Why 2,000-pound bombs? And I said, well, we wanted to minimize collateral damage. And when a 2,000-pound bomb goes off, sir, as you know, it makes a big hole. And I said, pretty good wide area for shrapnel. And I said, we wanted to minimize that. So, and besides that, I said the 500-pound bombs are more precise. I said the 2,000-pound bomb, when it comes down, well, it has some mass to it, and its CEP is larger than a 500-pound bomb, so more precisely. He said, carry 2,000-pound bombs. I said, yes, sir. And he said, going to take 6, and 2 are going to turn around and go back. I said, yes, sir. He said, which airplane are you in? I said, the first one across the beach. He said, that's what I figured. He said, how would you like to fly all that way down there and have a perfectly good airplane strapped to your ass and told to turn around and go back? I said, I wouldn't like that at all. And he said, neither would I. He said, launch 6. If you've got 6 good airplanes at the beach, strike with 6 airplanes. I said, yes, sir. And so we changed the briefing. Next day, I'm in his helicopter. He's got a helicopter. We're flying over to Patch Barracks, where General Rogers' headquarters is. And so I'm sitting here in the helicopter, and he's right here. Passed me on the leg, and he said, ready to go? I said, yes, sir. He said, you got any questions? I said, well, yes, sir. I said, if he asked me a question, I don't know whether to answer it the way Arnie Franklin would answer it, or do I answer it the way I think you would answer it? And he said, tell you what, he said, if he asks you a question, he said, you pause for just a few seconds like you're formulating your answer. And he says, and if I want to say anything, he said, I will. I said, yes, sir. So we got there, and unbeknownst to us, the Navy had been given the same task, and they were there to do the same briefing against those targets. And so they gave their briefing, and then and General Rogers asked him a couple of questions, and then I gave my briefing and a couple of questions from the staff, and then he said, why does your attack plan not call for any additional support? He's talking about EW, electronic warfare, all of those kinds of things. And I said, well, sir, I said, 2 o'clock in the morning, I said, intel tells us that, first of all, they don't have any fighters that Iraqi fighters that can, not Iraq, but Libya. They don't have any night fighters. I said, there's a squadron of Syrians that fly at night, but they only fly around the traffic pattern, so there's no threat at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, and besides that, they don't even operate their radars. They don't even man their SAM systems. They have an extensive SAM system, but they don't even man them at night. So there's no threat except for us hitting the ground. And I said, and we're not going to do that. So we don't need any support, just for tankers to get us there and back. And he said, how many airplanes did you expect to lose? And General Donnelly leaned forward and said, sitting right next to him, he said, well, sir, and General Donnelly put his hand up. And he said, with all due respect, General, he said, I asked him, he's in the airplane. And I thought, I said, well, sir, we don't expect to lose any airplanes because of what I said earlier about their SAM systems and their night fighters. And I said, and besides that, if we thought that there was some way we'd lose an airplane, we'd figure out some other way to do it. And General Donnelly's sitting there, and he goes like this, gives me a thumbs up. And basically the briefing was over. General Rogers said some nice things, and he said, go on back to your unit. He said, you'll be hearing from me. So we flew back to Ramstein, got in the C-130, and flew back to Nellis. And we sat there like that, just a small group of people involved in this planning because it was super, super secret for 3 months. And during that time, we received 37 additional targets via secret message, top secret message to us. How would you strike this target? How would you strike? And all we had to do was do the target itself because the plan getting down there was all the same. It's just get there and then hit this target instead of this one. Use these bombs instead of that one. So we sat there with these plans on the shelf, ready to go at a moment's notice, basically. We got to pick the crews. And so we decided that we would select the crews, 6 guys, and we wouldn't tell them where they were going or what they were going to do, just that they had been selected for a special mission, and they had to always be ready. The command post had to be able to get a hold of you on a moment's notice. So we didn't have cell phones in those days, didn't know what a cell phone was, but we carried a little beeper thing that would work on the base. But if you were going to leave the base, you had to call a command post, tell them where you're going, what the phone number is, where you can be reached, and when you get there, call them and tell them you're there. And then when you leave, for example, you leave home, call a command post, tell them you're leaving, going to the squadron. And that's the way we lived for January, February, and March. This is our last year there, 86, and because I was going to give up command of the squadron later in the fall. And Mickey, my wife, had wanted us to go to several trips, and I said, no, we're not going to do that. Can't do that, because I didn't want to be gone. Well, finally, April comes, and I'm really getting pressure. And so there was a Officers' Wives Club trip to Paris, France, and I said, okay, I'll go. And so we went, and somebody else was designated as the mission commander. And the whole time I'm in Paris, when we're traveling around, I'm looking at TV, seeing if I can't understand them, but seeing if I see a picture of something that's happened. Anyway, get back to my house at 10 o'clock at night on a Thursday night. And as soon as I come in and turn on the lights, my phone rings. And it's a fellow squadron commander, Slick Andrews. Slick because he didn't have any hair. We were together as second lieutenants. He didn't have hair then, so he was called Slick. And it was Slick, and he said, meet me in the field. It was an open field between our quarters. And we went out there, and he said, we've been executed. And I said, you got to be me. And he said, no, we got it. Be at the command post in the morning at 8 o'clock. So got up Friday morning and went to the command post. I read the execute order. And there he was. It wasn't an execute order, it was an alert order that said that these 5 targets would be struck. And 2 of them were over in the Medina Benghazi area, and 3 of them were over in the Tripoli area. Go back to the time that I first knew that the Navy was been briefed on it as well. One of the 3 targets that we had originally given was in the Medina Benghazi area. The other 2 were over in the capital area, right around there, where the threats were the strongest. It was severe. I mean, it was really a very dense, integrated air defense system that they had developed. And the guy who was my counterpart, who briefed their mission, he said, if we get executed for this, he said, us Navy guys are going to hit the one over there in the Medina Benghazi area, and you guys have a much better system for hitting those specific targets in there, so you guys ought to strike those. Well, sure enough, when we got those 5 targets, 2 of them were over in the Medina Benghazi area, and 3 were in over around the capital. In fact, one of them was his complex in the middle of the capital of Tripoli, and very densely defended, and there was 3 targets there. And what it said is that Air Force tasking is improbable. What he meant by that was, we don't know whether you guys we didn't have any place to take off from. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. So there wasn't any way for us to take off or land. And so they had not asked Maggie Thatcher yet whether it was okay to take off from the UK. She and Ronnie Reagan, President Reagan, had a special relationship. Anyway, so there we're sitting at possible targets, one of which we would be assigned for if we got approval to take off. But it was improbable. But he must have asked her. She said yes, because now, okay, Air Force, you will launch and strike one of these 3 targets if tasked. So we started planning. Last minute things, one target we hadn't seen before was, basically the complex downtown. That's where his guards were. That's where his command post was. That's where his house was, where he lived. All of those were in that complex. And so we selected where we were going to hit with each of the airplanes. And one of the targets was his house. And I assigned me to hit that target. And we had another guy that was going to hit it later on as well, as one of the 6. Anyway, so we were planning there, and so I asked Bob Pastusik, the chief of Radar Strike, I said, do we have approval to fly across France? And he said, I don't know, I'll call. He called, and they came back and said, assume you do, and you'll strike one of these 3 targets. So we started planning 6 airplanes across France, hit the tanker, go strike, come back. That was the plan. It's getting later. It's now Saturday. We still going to strike one target across France. And I said, call them again. We need to know, because if we don't have approval to fly across France, we got to go all the way around, and that takes a lot more tankers. We've got the tanker people that are planning as well, and they want to know. But anyway, came back, and it said, if you have approval to fly across France, you're going to strike one target with 6 airplanes. If you don't have approval, then you're going to fly all the way around and strike one target. Okay. Not long after that, we got a call, and they said, the plan is that if you get approval to fly across France, you're going to strike all 3 targets. Now we got to launch a lot more airplanes, a lot more tankers. And if you can't, we don't get approval to fly across France, you're going to fly around and strike one target with 6 airplanes. It's really getting frustrating now in the planning room. I mean, we're just, Jesus Christ, what are they going to do next? Finally, Saturday night, I tell Bob Pastusik, you need to call them, and you need to tell them that we either need to or get off the pot. Somebody needs to make a decision. What are we going to do? Early in the morning, he gets a call back and says, you want an answer? Here's your answer. You don't have approval to fly across France. You're going all the way around, and you're going to strike all 3 targets. It was like somebody had thrown a rattlesnake in the middle of the flight planning room. I mean, we just panicked, because there's not enough tankers in theater to do that. When I went to bed on Sunday morning actually it's Monday morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, so I could have 12 hours of crew rest to get back to the squadron at 2 in the afternoon. I went home, and I remember laying there in bed before I went to sleep thinking, we don't have enough tankers to even execute this mission. What is it that's going to blow up in our face to cause this to just blow up? Because once we start launching these airplanes, we got to keep launching these airplanes. We can't stop because timing-wise, we can't do that. We got to go. I fell asleep and woke up the next day. Mickey woke me up, my wife woke me up, and I went down to the squadron, and they were busy doing the flight plan, getting the books ready for these TACs. Tanker guys are still planning. What happened is they launched tankers, KC-10s, from the United States, flying to Mildenhall there at Lakenheath, where they're going to launch out of, with 2 crews. One crew's flying the airplane, and the other crew in crew rest that can get out, get in the airplane, and fly the mission. Didn't know what they were doing, where they were going, so we put an F-111 crew member that had the flight plan in there, in the cockpit with them, so they'd know where they're going and when they needed to be there. So we started launching airplanes. And we started launching airplanes. They started launching tankers, and they started launching tankers. And we had this system I won't go into about how we were going to rejoin. But basically, the tanker would launch when I knew how long it took from the tanker launched until we would rejoin on him on the SID, the Standard Instrument Departure, and it was basically 26 seconds. So I'd get a green light from the mobile controller, I'd hack my watch, 26 seconds later, I release brakes. 4 ship of airplanes, 3 primary attackers with 1 spare to replace if there's something wrong. So that's the way we did. Launched, everybody joined on their individual tanker. We joined up with the tanker. As soon as we got out over the water, plugged in to make sure that we could take fuel and the tanker could transfer fuel. And I did a check-in on HAVQuick radio, a secure radio, and of every airplane and its status. And I'd say remit, my call sign, remit 31, code 1. Remit 32, code 1. Remit 33, code 1. Remit 34, code 1. All of our airplanes were code 1, and our sprayer was. And then next airplane, Muddy Waters, one of the primary attackers. He said, boss, he said, I couldn't get a burner to light on takeoff. He said, I've tried several times, I can't get it to light. And I'm thinking, oh man, I don't want to tell Muddy to turn around and go back. But I said, if something happens and he loses the other engine, and now he has to have burner for that other engine for some reason, and it won't light, I said, Muddy, you got to go back. And he said, I know. So Muddy was replaced by a spare. One other airplane was replaced by a spare. And here goes this vast armada down. I took off about a few minutes after 6 in the evening. And here's this vast armada of airplanes that are going down the Atlantic out in international airspace. Can't fly across France, can't get in their airspace. Down past Spain, Portugal, through the Straits of Gibraltar. And when we went through the Straits of Gibraltar, all of our mother tankers, the tanker that I'm on, because I told them I do not want to go from tanker to tanker to tanker. I said, I've been in a lot, this is when we were planning, I said, I've been in a lot of red flag exercises, and I said, the thing that always gets balled up is the tanker rejoin. I said, and we can't wait and do orbits while we're trying to join the tanker. I want to stay on that tanker. And only that tanker. We took off radio silent. I took off executed. We were going to strike it. The only way we wasn't going to strike it is if somebody gave a keyword about abort. But nobody talked. No 111s talked to anybody. We just go onto the tanker, and the rule was if a F-111 pulls onto the tanker with the door open, you plug him and you pass gas until he stops it. And so that's the way we went down there. Always had to keep enough gas in the airplanes to get back to Lakenheath, because nobody else would let us land there. And then finally we reach a point where we can't get back to Lakenheath. So now we're going to land at Sigonella. So the whole time down there, we're figuring fuel, right seater. I say, Gurney, do we have enough, how much fuel does it take to get back to Lakenheath? He'd tell me not to go in there and plug and get that much fuel. And so that's the way we fuel. That's why I refueled 11 times that night, is because we had to keep enough fuel to get someplace where we could land. So anyway, when we went through the Straits of Gibraltar, every one of the F-111s were full of gas, and every one of the KC-10 mother tankers were full of fuel, and all the KC-135s and other KC-10s had gone back to Lakenheath to land. They refueled, and then they went back so that they would have gas when we were coming back. It was a big mission complex. It was complicated. There's a lot of ways this could go like that. But anyway, by this time, it's nighttime, of course. We go down there and refuel, and I had told my guys, as we get closer to the tanker drop-off point, we're going to cycle through, because I want every one of us to leave the tanker with airplane absolutely stuffed full of gas. And so that's the way we did. And so I flew down and using the INS sequence to the next turn point, and I knew when I needed to leave the tanker. And so at the time I needed to leave the tanker, I peeled off, started my descent down, always making sure we stayed below. But this time, the Libyans were alerted because of all the stuff that's been talked about. Well, everybody knew F-111s were planned for this attack, so they were ready. They were manning their systems. They were all up. We had by this time we had EF-111s join our group because they were going to go down and they were going to jam the search radars so that they couldn't find us. And by the way, the Air Force owned 500 feet and below with the lights out. The Navy, who was supporting us, owned above 500 feet with their lights on. That way we wouldn't run into each other. I told you we were executed, and my radio was on. I hadn't heard a recall or abort, and I'm worried about whether my radio is working or not, so I'd turn the squelch off every once in a while, so you could hear a weak signal or whatever, but I never heard it. Didn't see another airplane once I left the tanker because all of our lights are off. And so as I got closer, out over the water, automatic terrain following radar, airplane goes down to 1,000 feet. F-111 has a automatic terrain following radar. You just tell it how high above the ground you want to fly, and it will automatically fly there. So I descended to 1,000 feet, set clearance plane, and then as we got closer, I dropped it down to 750, then I went to 500, then I went to 300, and then I went to 200 feet. So here it is, 2 o'clock in the morning, can't see anything. And the airplane is flying 200 feet above the water on the radar altimeter. I keep listening, and I don't see another airplane. Get to approaching the IP point, but I forgot to tell you this. The weather had briefed that we would have a 20-knot tailwind. And as I got down there and looked, it kept on the nose, 20 knots, which means more thrusts to maintain time. Don't want to light the afterburner because you can see it. And so I just went to mill power, and I was behind in time. And so I went to mill power, got to IP, turned left, heading to the coast, and I looked up, and there was a Navy airplane went across the top of me with his lights on, firing an anti-radiation missile. And I said, well, shit, there's two of us out here, because I hadn't seen another airplane or anything. The thought crossed my mind, are we the only ones? But it didn't take long before I realized that there were a lot of other people awake too, because as we got close to the coast, I kept getting raw indications of search radars from the SAMs, a bunch of them on our raw scope. But EF-111s were doing their job, and they couldn't find us with their search radars. So they were looking for us with their TTRs, their target tracking radars, which is like a pencil beam, and it would sweep across the airplane and it would show up. And I got more. And then I started getting signals from a Crotel missile, which is a very low altitude, short range SAM system. Excellent, built by the French. Excellent. Problem was that its transmission in the target tracking radar was the same frequency as our TFR. So every time they would sweep across me, the airplane would try to jump up, and I'd paddle it off and push it back down. And I did that 2 or 3 times, and Gurney said, oh, this is making me sick, because he's in the scope. And so I said, okay. I paddled it off, and I said, Gurney, I'm going to go down to 100 feet. I said, I will not hit the water. Don't worry. So I paddled it off. I'm flying at 100 feet. And he said, I can't see my offset aim point. You've got to climb up. I said, pick another offset point. And so now we're coming up on the coast. We're going to do a Pave tack toss. We're about 26,000 feet from the target. I'm going as fast as I can get it to go in mill power. F-111 will go almost supersonic. But he put this Pave tac pod out, and the airplane slowed down, and I got behind in time. I said, raise your pod. And he said, I'm afraid I'll forget to put it out. And I said, don't worry, leave it up. And so we got to getting close to the coast. I said, okay, put your pod down. He put his pod down. I'm in mil power, and the airspeed starts bleeding off, but I'm doing about 0.96. And it starts bleeding off, but that's okay. I'm not going to light the burner. And so we're crossing the coast, and I'm afraid I'm going to hit a power line that's there on the coast. So I released and let the TFR, and I climbed up to 300 feet to clear the power line there, and got about 26,000 feet. And I said, range. And he said, I'm looking at the offset. I said, range. He switched back to target direct. He said, pull the nose up to about 40 degrees of bank. The 4 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs come off, and now they're ballistic. And as they're going up, well, I take the airplane and I roll it up to about 134 degrees of bank, pull the nose back down to the horizon, roll out, turn to the exit heading, and roll out. And I'm waiting for the bombs to hit. Bombs are now like this. I've got a readout in my cockpit where my instrument cross-check is. It's called a bandit. Before release, it tells you time to release, reads down to second. The bombs come off, it changes to time to impact. So I know how long it is before the bombs hit. He has to turn his laser on 10 seconds to impact to give the bombs time to guide to that spot on the ground. So I said, 10 seconds, laser on. He said, laser on. So he's firing the laser, and I'm flying this way, and I'm getting nervous because there's a ZSU-23-4 that had just hosing the far out of us. But I'm going too fast. He's not leading me enough. It's behind us, but he's getting closer and closer and closer, and I'm getting more and more nervous as we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, impact. Impact. Come out of the scope, and re-engage the TF, and down I go. Back down to TF altitude, 300 feet. Levels out, and we're going out. And Gurney says, oh, that was great. And so we now coasting out there, and it just all hell breaks loose. They start shooting everything. But this ZSU-23, he's not following me anymore. So by the way, I dropped out a couple of bundles of chaff just in case it was radar guided. But it went. And the toggle switch that you use to dump chaff sticks up, and if you punch it the other way, a flare comes out the back in case it's an eye or whatever. And I hit it, and a flare comes out, and the guy behind me, by about 15, 20 seconds, his name is Dick Brown. And so Dick says on his radio to his right seater, he said, they got the boss, because he can see me up there. The lights on the city are on. I mean, you can see, look outside. I didn't have to fly instruments, you can see. And he could see my airplane up there pulling, saw it. And he saw that ZSU and that flare come out, and he thought he hit me. He said, he got the boss, because it was in line with what he was looking at. But they didn't get the boss. But anyway, we got back out over the water. Heart rate comes back down a little bit. And then I make the call, the only call that you made. You were either supposed to say, Tranquil Tiger was the code word that you sent if you were successful in striking your target. So I said, remit 3-1, feet wet, Tranquil Tiger. It means I hit my target. Or if you didn't, for whatever reason, you aborted or whatever, you would say, remit 3-1, Frosty Freezer, which meant you weren't successful. So gave the radio call, and now we're heading out the water. I've got it in mil power as fast as it'll go, start sweeping the wings back. The bombs are gone now. So I'm sweeping the wings all the way back, 72 degrees, and we're going scalded dog. And the deal was that the Navy had a line of picket ships out there. And they were called delouse ships. And what happened is if there was a Libyan fighter chasing you out, well, they were going to strip him off. So make sure that you had the right squawk on your IFF. And I was worried about, if I'm a Navy captain of a boat and I got an airplane coming at me at 600 knots, I'm real nervous. So I told Gurney, I said, offset us about 10 or 15 degrees from the boat. And so he could see the boat. And so we went by the boat at 200 feet, going 600. One of the guys, that Jim Jimenez, that was in my flight, he joked and says when he went out, he was doing 660 knots when he went by the boat. And somebody said, why were you doing 660? He said, because I couldn't get it to go 661. but anyway, we went really fast past the delouse ship. And then I realized that, there's no threat. So I started climbing and slowing down and sweeping the wings forward and cruising back to the tanker. And so that was the way we did the attack. But as we were coasting out, I looked to my left and I saw a smear across the water. And I said to my right seater, Gurney, I said, somebody just hit the water. And because I had seen a lot of napalm dropped when I was serving my tours in Southeast Asia, and that's what it looked like. And so I knew that an airplane had hit the water at a very glancing blow because it smeared across the water versus, an impact, steep impact. So we get back up to the tankers and we start checking in. And we go through the check-in, and Karma 5-2 doesn't check in. So in a few minutes, the command ship does another radio check-in. So we go through remit 3-1, remit 3-2, remit 3-3. Next one, Karma 5-1, Karma 5-3. So now I knew who it was that had hit the water. And so we sat there in an orbit waiting for them to show up when I knew that they weren't going to show up. But anyway, finally the decision was we're going to go back. And so we start back flying the same route as we were before. So we were up there, and my right seater said, pull up your HF button, high frequency button, which I keep down all the time because it's got static on it. And he had tuned it to Voice of America. And I'm listening, and Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, is standing in front of the Pentagon. I didn't know where he was, but he was in front of the Pentagon, and he was giving a press briefing to the American people, a press conference, if you will. Not a press conference, but he was just telling them about what had just happened, that F-111s from Lakenheath plus Navy whatever had struck targets in whatever he said. And he said there's an airplane overdue, and it may be en route to the alternate base. Well, I thought, well, shit, yeah, I knew he's gone because I saw him hit the water. But anyway, we flew on back to Lakenheath, same route back. And when I had took off, the sun was setting in the west. And by the time we got back up to outside France, out in international airspace to land at the UK where the sun was rising in the east. So we'd been strapped in the airplanes by the time we landed for about 14 hours. It's a long time to be in an airplane smaller than a Corvette cockpit. But anyway, that's the way we did it. When we got back, there's a recorder that records everything that's said, a recording of the picture of the right seater's scope, what he sees, whether it's the flare or the radar, the forward-looking infrared or the radar, and there's a clock in there. And I knew I was exactly on time. And we looked to see on the clock when I said somebody just hit the water. And we computed where I was on the ground over the water, and then I said it was about my 9:30, 10 o'clock position. So we drew a line there, and that's where Karma 5-2 would have been on its in-grouse route. So he crashed or was lost inbound to the target. And we don't know, he didn't make a radio call. I heard no radio call. Other airplanes that were in the same general area saw the same thing I did. They heard no radio call on the strike frequency or on guard, so there was no radio call. Don't know why. Later on, we don't know why he hit the water. If he was at the altitude that he was supposed to be at, well, there's no chance that a missile would hit him. But when you're flying at 200 feet at 0.95 Mach, you're 2 or 3 seconds from dying all the time. If the TF isn't working right and you're not paying attention, you can hit the water. If he was aggressively maneuvering to avoid what he perceived to be a missile at him, and he hit the water. The family, he was a combat loss. We don't know why. But the reason I told you about hearing Caspar Weinberger on TV, on the radio, or on our radio, is because our daughter, Monica, was here in Bowling Green, and she was going to Western, and she was at my mom's house, and it was about dinner time, and they saw the same thing. Caspar Weinberger saying, so she picks up the phone, and she calls her mom, and she said, "Mom, where's Dad?" And I had not told Mickey that where I was going or what I was doing. I just told her that we were having an exercise at the squadron. And Mickey said, "Well, he's at the squadron, they're having an exercise. Why?" And Monica says, "Well, we just saw on TV where F-111s from Lakenheath just bombed Libya. And knowing Dad, that's where he is." And Mickey said, "Now, Monica, you know, if he was going to go do something like that, he would have told me." Monica said, "Well, there's an airplane missing." And Mickey said, "I'll call the squadron." And so, "I'll call you back." So she called the squadron. Dan's there. He answers the phone. She said, "Dan, may I speak with Arnie?" And he says, "Well, he's not here." And she said, "Where is he?" So Dan paused, and she said, told him what Monica had just said. And Dan said, "Well, that's where he is." And Mickey said, there's an airplane missing. And Dan, rightly so, said, "I don't know anything about that." And he said, "I won't know anything about that until for about 6.5 hours when I hear his voice when he calls for landing at Lakenheath." And he said he won't be back for 6.5 hours. And so Mickey said, "I'll call you when I hear him." And so he calls back. Mickey calls back to Monica and says, "Well, that's where he is. But we don't know if it's him or not, and we won't know for 6.5 hours." And so there's my mom sitting here in Bowling Green, beside her bed for 6.5 hours. And so I tell people that story, when I brief this, to say, you know, we say a lot about supporting the men and women in uniform when they're wherever they are. But there are other people involved in this, and it's the families. And we need to do a better job as a country to support them while their men and women are off at wherever they are around the world. Anyway, sorry. But that's what I remember about that, how awful that made me feel. Get back to the squadron, and we go through our debriefing and all that. The Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force is at the end of the runway, saluting as we took off. I thought that's pretty neat. And when we landed the next day and got back to the squadron, he was there, congratulating everybody, wanted to see everybody's video and watch it, and he'd tell his aide, "I want that one." And then he'd watch another one, "I want that one," and another, "I want that one." And what happened is they had put together a video, a collage of the videos, and he took off, and he took back to the United States, and there's a picture in Newsweek magazine of him standing up there pointing to the screen to the president, and the president is watching the videos. I thought that's pretty neat. But anyway, we did all of our stuff. You know, everybody's congratulating. There was donuts, there was beer, there was everything there. And then by late morning, close to noon, things wind down, and I go home, and Mick meets me at the front door. And we hug, and she said, "Don't you ever do that to me again." And I got the last word, and I said, "Yes, dear." And I never did that to her again. But anyway, that was El Dorado Canyon and my specific part in it. But it was the highlight of my career. And we hit our target.